Going on, everyone? This is Raw and Unfiltered with David Elliott. And in today's video, this is going to be a 4-part presentation. The first video, which would be number 1, we are going to learn how to pre-qualify your underwriting. Yes, you heard that correctly. One of the biggest mistakes that I'm seeing on the wholesaler side of things, the investor world, generally anybody in real estate, is you need to really look at the numbers quickly. And what I mean by numbers, I mean the property details. You need to be able to look at property details under a minute. You need to be able to make a decision and know, is this a lead that I want to pursue further? Do not spend 10 to 15 minutes doing a full underwriting for a property just to find out that it was never going to be a deal in the first place. And you certainly don't want to spend 10 to 15 minutes on a full underwriting on a deal that the seller is unlikely to accept. So here on your screen, we have a pre-qualifying underwriting calculator meant to answer both of those questions. We are going to go over a couple of examples. I have 3 right now that I would like to go over with everyone. And we're going to grade these properties and grade the underwriting associated on the property when structuring a creative strategy. We're going to assign it a letter. And we're going to assign it a letter the same way your traditional grade school system would grade your homework or your test. A, B, C, and F. With A being the highest quality of a lead, meaning that it is the best underwriting associated with that lead, also meaning that it's going to give you very good profit, a low entry fee, high cash on cash return. That is what we're looking for. We are looking for the A's and we're looking for the B's. Every now and then you'll come across C's and D's, and those would be more of a follow-up. It might not be a deal today, but it may be a deal tomorrow. And you need to be able to look at that property and its numbers that are associated with the purchase price, with the encumbrances that are associated on there, with HOA, with rent values, all of which need to be calculated in under a minute. And this calculator here is going to allow you to do just that. So let's get started. This is going to be a raw and unfiltered video. So this is going to be a benefit to you all. And we're going to start off with a C-class property. And you're going to learn right away why it's going to be labeled as a C-class property in the sense of the underwriting. So let me pull that up right now. Here it is. Now, we're not going to waste time going through property photos because that's not what matters. What matters is the purchase price, the rent value in that area, which we may be able to actually find out right now. Looks like we're looking at about $2,000 in rent. Now, clearly this is just an estimate, so it is highly suggested that you comp out your rent values according to the specs of the property. So in this example, this would be a 4-bed, 3-bath, 2,000 square feet. If you were to do a rental comp comparison, you could use a service provider such as Zillow Rent Manager, Rentometer, and there's probably a few others out there that are just as good, such as Rentcast. That'll all give you a pretty good underlining example of what you could expect in terms of rent values. Now, for the purposes of underwriting, we're simply going to look at the estimates, because as long as we have the estimates, we will know whether or not we have a deal that is worth pursuing. So right now, from this one property, we know that it's currently listed at $363,000. Remember that number. We need to know that number. We also know that the rent value is $2,000. So remember that number too. Now we're going to go right back to the pre-qualifying creative calculator. We're going to go over to the current ask price. we know that it is $373 is the purchase price of the property. We'll come over here, and this column over here, this is a conventional column. Now, what conventional is looking at, it's looking at cash, and it's looking at a retail buyer purchasing a property via FHA, VA, conventional loans, any such loans such as these. That would be your conventional loans, conventional buyer. This is what we're looking at. So when I am structuring creative deals, what I like to do is I like to look at the best case scenario from the seller's point of view. And if my creative offer can equal or outcompete what the seller's best case scenario would be, I know that I have a deal that is worth pursuing in the eyes of the seller. The other thing that I would have to do then is I would come over here to the right-hand side. I would put in my rent values, which we will do shortly. And I would want to get an idea of what is the estimated deal projections, right? It may be a deal worth that the seller is willing to listen to, but is it a deal worth for the buyer? So it's going to be a two-part negotiation. So let's take a look at that. We're going to take a look at the encumbrance right now. So I actually do have that pulled up from PropStream. And so here it is on your screen. Now this was pulled up earlier. The encumbrance is going to be around $286. So now this is going to be your estimate. So we're going to go back to the creative calculator and we're going to put in $287. Let's round it up. Okay. Now I'm going to come back up here to the top and I'm going to look at the best case scenario. Best case scenario would be that the seller gets to walk away with their full ask price of $363. This is the best case scenario for the seller. So I want to look at the best case scenario. And now that I mentioned that, we do need to fix that. 363. 1, 2, 3. There we go. Perfect. So we're going to look at the best case scenario, which is 363. Now the best case scenario for a sales fee for the property would be a 3% commission on the listing side, 0 commission for the buyer, and 1% for closing costs. That's best case scenario. So I'm going to put in 4% total. That's going to be my total sales with the property. Now, best case scenario towards capital gains is also going to be about 15%. So now we've already got one column filled out. I'll come over here to the agent commission and we'll put in 3%. And this is what the selling agent, the listing agent, can expect to net at closing, $10,890. Now, you do have the option to put in a cash offer. So if you are doing a lot of fix and flips, if you're doing novation deals, or you simply want to use this as a advantageous advantage to yourself when you are speaking with the agent or the seller, what you could do is one of my strategies that I do recommend you do. It just needs to be executed correctly. You could present them a bluff cash offer. So what you could do is give them 90% on cash. That would be a bluff cash offer. That would put you at 326, 700. Maybe for simplicity's sake, let's go back down to 325. And this would be my bluff cash offer that I could present to the seller. And so in a conversation such as this, I could tell them, I will pay you $325 on cash, or I will pay you $363 via creative terms. Which would you like? So that's how I would implement it. You could also implement it for a fix and flip or a novation. This is just a really quick tab here just to kind of get an idea. of where you will need to be in terms of cash. So if you were going to offer them 65% on cash to the seller, you'd be looking at 235 on cash. Now, in this case, they would obviously say no to your deal, or not your deal, but to your offer, because they would have to come to pocket with $60,000. So having a calculator such as this will really give you a quick idea and calculate it right in front of you whether or not this is a deal that the seller is willing to take. And so the answer is no. They're not willing to come to closing with $60,000. Now, if you wanted to, you can maybe come up to 80%. Let's try that. Let's go up to 290, which is also not going to work. They're going to have to come to closing with $8,600. Okay, let's try 85%. Let's try 310. Okay, now they're making 10 grand. So something as simple as this will literally give you an idea of how much money is the seller going to net at closing. They're going to net $10,600 at closing from your 310 cash offer, which could be real or it could be a bluff, depending on what your strategy is, right? If you really can come in on cash, whether you're using private money lending, hard money lending, you really can purchase the property at 310 when it was originally listed at 363. There's some room there for some sweat equity, and you know that the ARV is maybe going to be around 425, 430, 450. If the seller is willing to accept this, then fantastic, right? You just bought the property at 310. Or you could use it in a more strategic sense, and you could present them a bluff cash offer. Now, of course, this is a double-edged sword. So you really want to be careful with how you're executing this. Because in most cases, when you're talking about this large sum of money, most agents are going to be asking you for proof of funds, or a seller might be asking you for proof of funds. So just be aware of that. Now, in this example, we're going to look at the best case scenario. I'm not going to look at cash offers because the whole point of this is to compare best case scenario conventional versus your creative lead. Your creative offer. So let's go back to 363. At 363, the best case scenario for the seller is going to be $61,000. That's best case scenario. So that's quite a bit of money. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to come over here to the creative side of the column, and we're going to see how much down we could give the seller at closing. And is it a deal that the seller is willing to accept, considering that they have another option where they could wait 60 days, 90 days for a conventional offer to come through at their full asking price. Okay, so if we're listed at 363, I am going to first start off at anywhere between 8 and 10% as a down payment. So for simplicity's sake, let's give the seller 10% down. So that would be $36,000. Okay. This does not include the sales fee. Now, the sales fee for a creative transaction will always be slightly less than conventional. Normally, when I'm looking at creative will be about 0.7 of the purchase price. That seems to be about the average. So if we have 0.7 in closing costs and we have 3% for the listing agent commission, not the buyer agent, but the listing agent, this would be best case scenario. That would be a total of 3.7. Okay. Now, we do have a seller carryback. Now, the moment that we have a seller carryback, which means that the total equity of the property was not paid out up front at closing. So the seller still has $40,000 of gross equity. That $40,000 would be seller carryback, meaning you are responsible as the buyer to pay off that $40,000 where you would be stealing equity from the property. And you don't want to be stealing equity, so please do not do that. You have the option of giving them a creative deal at $40,000 less. So you could come in at $323 and you could wipe out this seller carryback. But that's not the whole point of creative now, is it? When we do have a seller carryback, your tax rate is going to be at 0% because the funds received from the property have not been fully, what's the word I'm looking for, completed. They have not received all of their funds. They're still missing out on $40,000. So we're going to keep that at 0%. So that's actually a huge benefit for creative. You can defer your capital gains. So this is what this is. Most sellers are going to be at 15% capital gains. Some sellers will be at 20%. But, 90% of the time, you're looking at 15%. Okay. Now, if you are wholesaling this deal and you're not the end buyer, you're going to want to include your assignment fee. So let's say you have an assignment fee of $10,000. And now, if you do recall from before, we looked at the Zillow rental estimates and we saw that it was going to be about $2,000 a month. So let's add that, $2,000 a month on rent. Okay. Now, we pretty much calculated everything that we needed to calculate for creative. Now, normally with creative, you can come up on the asking price. You absolutely can. And in fact, we're going to do that just knowing that they're listed right now at $363. If they got a full ask price at $363 conventional, they're going to walk away with $61,000. So let's give the best case scenario for creative as well, because we gave the seller best case scenario for conventional. Let's give them best case scenario on creative. And if our best case scenario on creative cannot compete with what they would receive conventionally, we know that we need to grade this property accordingly. And when I mean grade, I mean assign it a letter grade, A, B, C, or F. Those would be your letter grades. So best case scenario, we could probably give them 10% over ask price. And I would be comfortable doing that, just being that the average appreciation year over year for the majority of properties over the country of the U.S., you're looking between 8 and 10% year over year. So if we gave them 10% over ask, I think I would be okay with that. The moment we start pushing 12% over ask or 15% over ask, now you're heading into dangerous territory, because now you need to allow the market in that particular area to catch up to you overpaying on that property. So be aware of that. So 10% would be a safe spot in terms of your cap limit that you're willing to go after and pay for that seller. So we're going to offer them $400,000. So let's do that. So we'll go over here and we're going to put in $37,000. I'll bring this up to $400,000 purchase price. Okay, beautiful. Now, when this happens, we can come up on the down payment. The down payment right now is 9%. Normally, when I'm looking at down payments for the seller, I would like to stay below 12%. So I'm going to give them the best case scenario of 12%, but I'm going to start at 10 just for visual sakes. We're going to start at 10%. So let's look at that. So at 10%, you should be able to do the math real quick, right? It's going to be $40,000. So at 10%, the seller can expect to walk away with $25,000 at closing. Now let's give them 12%. Let's see if I can figure this one out. I actually think it's going to be about 48. Let's go with 48. Okay, perfect. So at 48,000, this would be the best case scenario on creative. So seller's going to walk away with half of the money that they could receive from a full price offer conventionally. Now, what are the chances of the seller getting a full price offer at 363? At least in today's market, when this video is being recorded August 30th, 2023. It's going to be very unlikely. Is it possible? Yeah, it's definitely possible, but not at today's interest rates, right? We're sitting at between 7.25 and 7.6% interest right now. So it's not the best case scenario for a retail buyer. So it wouldn't surprise me if a retail buyer is going to want a slight discount. So let's go down to like maybe 99%, or maybe let's go down to maybe 95%. Let's try 345. They're listed at 363. Let's go to 345. Okay, at 345, seller is still going to walk away with 45 grand in this example. That's a lot of money to be receiving up front when your creative lead that you thought you had, and you're now looking at the numbers more closely, you're seeing that your best case scenario on creative, you can only offer them 33 grand at closing. That's your best case scenario. Now, you could certainly come up on that down payment, but now you'd be exceeding the 15% entry fee. That's not something that I would recommend. In fact, I'd probably come down to maybe 45. I'd come down to 45. I don't think I would go past 45. I want to keep my entry fee below 15%. Now, by doing that, I can see that my approximate cash on cash return after my liability expenses, such as any type of note payments or HOA fees, it's going to be about 7.28%. Now, that's going to fluctuate depending on the interest rate that is associated with the property when you take it over subject to. But we can see here that even after the expenses, we're still going to be net approximately 350. So do we have a deal here on creative? I'm going to have to say no. This is not a deal that I would want to waste any more time on until this current ask price comes down further. They're listed at 363. If I gave them a creative offer at 400,000, that would be the best that I could do. Best that I could possibly do. They're going to get half of that money at closing. You may be able to convince the seller that even though you are receiving half at closing, you're going to make $37,000 on the back end. Now, is that a conversation that the seller is willing to listen to? Well, I think it's going to be really dependent on your days on market. If they're under 60 days, maybe 45 days, if they're 45 days on market, it's not going to be likely. But the moment that they start pushing past the medium days on market, based off of that particular zip code, and your agent, the agent that's associated with the property, they know very well what the medium days on market is for specific properties in a particular neighborhood, in a county, in a town. They know. So the moment that days on market climbs past the medium days on market, notice I'm saying medium days on market, not average, because with averages, you can then have outliers. You may have one property that was listed on market for 200 something days, while the median was around 50 to 60 days. So we're not looking at averages, we're looking at median days on market. So I would say that this particular deal right here, I would label this one as a C. So this would be one that I may consider for underwriting, but it's going to be a C for see you later, and I'm going to follow up with you when you drop your price. The moment that I see a price drop from 363 is the moment that I would follow up with the seller. Let's say it dropped 20 grand. I would follow up with them and say, hey, I can see that your days on market is, getting closer now to 90 days. Would you be willing to get your full ask price, but on terms? Or would you be willing to get terms, but we're going to pay you $37,000 over ask price. In fact, I'm going to pay you $400,000 on the property, but it's going to be subject to terms, right? So this becomes a lot of finessing when you're talking with agents, when you're talking with sellers, and based off of a quick calculation such as this, you'll know right away, is this a property that the seller is willing to accept or not? Are they going to accept your offer? Probably not. They're not going to accept your offer, so don't make this a priority to follow up with that agent or seller. Now, is this property going to cash flow? Yes, it'll cash flow. I'm going to make about $350 a month net. Now, this is not a full underwriting, but it's going to give me a pretty good idea of where my numbers are going to be after a full underwriting. Now, a full underwriting takes time, That's going to take you about 10, 12, 15 minutes, depending on how much you actually need to crunch. So this is going to be a really quick way to just know straight off the bat, do I have a deal worth pursuing? And if I do have a deal worth pursuing, is the seller likely to take my creative offer? And if they are likely to take my creative offer, then what are my deal projections? What can I expect from the underwriting point of view? So, recap, this property here would be a C. It's not the best, and the reason why it's not the best is mostly to do with that seller carryback and mostly to do with money being received at closing. Seller is going to get $60,000 at closing. That's best case scenario. Now, are they really going to get $60,000 at closing? No. In most cases, you're going to have a buyer's agent commission. That might be 3%. So let's bump that up to 7%. Okay. But even then, even at 7%, even at 8%, they're still going to walk away with way more money at closing than you ever could on your best case scenario via creative terms. So I hope that makes sense. This is going to be part 1, and we're going to label this property as a C-class property, such as see you later. I am going to wait until your purchase price comes down. Okay.